I do a lot of panels to women who are thinking about politics. And I know that like 30% of them are introverts. They're either pretending that they're not and it's exhausting them, or they think they can't do this because they're introverts. And I just want them to know that they absolutely can. There are things they got to learn how to manage. When I was campaigning, I was very specific with my team. I said, I am an introvert. That means I need downtime. You can pack my day, but just make sure that I can get out for my run, that I've got like a half hour every now and then to just go off by myself.
This is Only the Bold, where I have deep, riveting, and fascinating conversations with truly phenomenal humans. I'm your gay, ADHD-having, and compulsively curious host, Gia Goodrich, and among many things, I can't get enough of hearing people's incredible stories and getting inside the way their brains work. Each week, I have conversations where we dig below the surface and really uncover everything it takes to live a truly bold life. Despite the messages we get from media and popular culture, the boldest, truest version of yourself is exactly what the world needs. Hello, hi, how are yas? I'm coming to you from what is my birthday. Today's my birthday, not when you hear this, but when we're recording this. I don't know about you, but birthdays are just like deeply complicated for me. They are moments of reflection, and I don't really like to pause enough to reflect. I don't like sitting with myself, but they are these annual markers of what has come up, what the year has been like, and I'm really trying to give myself grace, but this year is just not one that immediately feels like it was amazing. I am just, trying to be, who am I kidding though? Like really launched a podcast, traveled for the first time in a year, and just had incredible experiences with incredible humans. But, it's so easy to look back and be like, what did I do? Where did the time go? I should be here versus here, whatever. So I am actively not doing that today. And in fact, I recorded next week's episode today, which, let me tell you, you are definitely going to want to listen to it because it is chef's kiss, so good. And I was just so on my toes the whole time. It was a great conversation. But yeah, today it's complicated, but I'm choosing feeling good, really trying to enjoy this moment of friends and family reaching out, just honoring the life. I mean, really, we're waking up, we're breathing. It's a good fucking day. And so often we can get lost in the hustle, lost in the emotions, lost in the brainwashing, gaslighting of the things, instead of really like just having that deep gratitude for the fact that like today is another day that we get to live, that we get to show up as ourselves, that we get to have contrasting experiences that reflect to us our needs, wants, and desires, and we get that chance to live boldly every day. So I am actually intentionally going to sit down, write some stuff. I'll probably share this with you in an upcoming episode and really reflect on this last year, but also start this habit of allowing myself to really take stock and really do so in a way that's not disregarding or shaming or glossing over the past, but that's really supporting who I've been, who I am, where I'm going, and trying to reparent myself, give myself the grace, all this kind of woo-woo self-care vibes that we know I don't naturally love, but of course I need, just being gracious with myself. So I hope that you, fabulous, bold soul that you are out there doing that, really honoring yourself. And let me tell you, today's episode was just so amazing. I talk with the Commissioner Susheela Jayapal, and when we think about people who are just movers and shakers and creating something despite circumstances and adversity, she is such an incredible human who has gone through it, who has earned the respect, who has earned the wisdom. And she shares so much of what goes on the inside. And I just am so grateful for that, because politics can be this sticky, confusing place, and it can be so easy to not really be in touch with who these humans are, and to know that people who are as loving, generous, tough, kind are really the ones that we are looking to help affect a change that's going to benefit our communities. Like, it just gives me so much hope in, what has been the last few years of political strife in the United States, but probably wherever you're listening from. So I hope you thoroughly enjoy this episode. And if you do, and you feel, the desire to like screenshot it, share it on your Insta story, or like send it to a friend, that will just make my birthday. Let's roll into it. Today's guest is an incredible force for good in the world. She's a politician, which is a very charged word in our cultural climate. But the more I think about what that actually means, the more fascinated I am by her. She is the first Indian American person to hold elective office in Oregon, where she has served as District 2 Multnomah County Commissioner of Oregon since 2019, where she has been facing complicated and important issues daily, from sex trafficking, workforce development, public police accountability to houselessness. And it's a role that comes with a lot of scrutiny and opinions, as well as dehumanizing energy that we just generally tend to throw at politicians, who are somehow expected to always say the right thing and somehow come up with all the answers. After moving to the United States, being born in India and raised throughout Southeast Asia, she found herself in what I could guess is the quintessential American dream of money, prestige, bragging rights. But at some point, she stepped away from the illustrious, status imbued roles like being a financial analyst at Goldman Sachs to being a high powered litigator and even running Adidas' $1 billion empire's legal department. And she transitioned from those roles to leadership roles in nonprofits and community organizations like Portland Public Schools Foundation, Metropolitan Family Services, and CASA, an organization for children in foster care. And those are just a few. So, who actually does that? Who actually leaves all of the greatness and the goodness to really take an active role in changing the world and the community and dedicating so much of their life to that? She's small in stature and could be unassuming, but the powerful force that she exudes is palpable. And I am so in awe of how, simultaneous to everything she's doing, she's also reshaping what it means to be an emotionally centered, collaborative leader in a world filled with white cis hetero dude boro curmudgeons. The glorious, impactful, and authentically bold soul, Susheela Jayapal. Woo! I'm telling you, that was like the longest intro ever, but I didn't even get all of it in this intro because your life is just so amazing and fascinating.
Well, thank you for that intro. As I said while you were talking, there's so many phrases in there that I'm going to use, especially the last one, the something 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 bro. You got to write that down for me. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. And there's so much that I want to get into, but I think primarily this idea of you coming to the United States at the age of 16, finding yourself for the first time in this totally different environment, from the weather to the food to the people and all their beliefs and everything. Talk us through that experience, because I feel like so much of what is coming up now is this idea and the story of the immigrant and what that means and what that looks like. And you are somebody who has lived it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That's a question I come back to a lot because it's at the root of a lot of things for me. Um, by a little bit by way of context, I guess, as you mentioned, I grew up in India and Southeast Asia. My parents were really ahead of their time for, I think, Indian parents of their generation. I have a younger sister as well. And their ambition for us was that we would be financially independent. That was what they wanted. And so that's what they sent us to the US to do. To them, going to an American college was the key to unlocking that future. I landed here at 16. I went to a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania. This was 1979. So again, context setting. And in 1979, there were maybe a handful of what they called foreign students. They didn't call us international students. We were definitely foreign students. So a handful of foreign students on this campus, maybe a couple of handfuls of students of color. The best way I can describe it is to say that I didn't have the language to describe what that felt like. I didn't have the language to talk about what it was like to be in an environment where my race was so different and where race mattered in a way that I hadn't experienced before.
Yeah.
I didn't have language to talk about microaggressions. So that's one bucket of things. And I think the other bucket of things that's just universal to the immigrant experience is also knowing that you're outsider trying to figure out how to navigate systems that you're not familiar with. And at the same time, trying to fit in. You're always trying to do both at the same time.
Let's go back to the environment of your parents, because I feel like this is a classic story that we hear of a lot, where you have a generation that's really like having very clear ideas of how they can help tee up the situation for their kids to really be successful in a way that makes sense to them. And then a lot of times for those individuals, stepping foot and starting that path can be very different than the expectations are going into it. And I imagine for you that there must have been some kind of complicated energy around the idea of, yes, I do want to be successful and this is what success looks like, and I want to have a good life and I want to please my parents and make them proud. And also I might have these other drives, or even the experience itself feels so rough and rocky.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it took me a long time to sort through all of those things because I absolutely carried with me for a long time the fact that that's what my parents wanted for me, not just what that's what they wanted for me, that's what they sacrificed for me, right? So they
Yeah.
never wanted to move to the United States. So when they sent us here, they I don't know if they thought about it, but the reality was that they were accepting a life for themselves in which we would not be with them. I've
Right.
always gone back to see them. I try to go back once a year, but they are now, my mom's 81, my dad's 91. They're now facing getting older without us. And so that
Right.
sacrifice, I think, is also very much present. And I think again is the driving motivation for lots of folks, not just immigrants, but we all, when our parents in particular have sacrificed for a particular vision that they had, it's really difficult to depart from that vision. And yet, I guess I would also say that that combination of knowing what it feels like to be the outsider, to be always sort of with your nose pressed up on the glass almost, you're looking through to this other world that you've just been dropped in.
Right.
And then also understanding that sacrifice. In a way, those two things together were also what allowed me or prompted me to leave that other life, to leave Adidas, and to leave practicing law, recognizing that for all of the wonderful things and benefits it had brought me, it wasn't fulfilling my desire to really live out what I actually think my parents wanted for me, right? I mean, and they could
Yeah.
identify financial independence as the thing because they themselves were sort of economically always a little bit fragile. But once that got taken care of, I believe that and they're so proud of us now, what they wanted for us was to feel fulfilled and to have a sense of purpose.
Mhm.
And that combination of understanding their sacrifice, knowing, what it was like to be the outsider is what gave me my sense of purpose.
And I think that's a really important thing to tease apart, is that I feel like, and I catch myself doing this just already when I think about in reference to my sisters that are a decade younger than me, or my niece whom I love, and I'm trying to, honor what she's going through without projecting these sorts of ideas of how I think she needs to be. I think often we conflate the true outcome that we want for someone, which is to feel fulfilled and on a path that they love and happy with how to get there. It can be really tough, I think, to pull that apart because we have so many ingrained messages of the way to get there. But I even think for ourselves, like there are so many times when I look back on my life that I was just like, 100% locked on to a certain idea of like, okay, if I get this job, I'm going to be rocking it. This is going to be amazing.
Hmm.
And then either you get there and you're like, oh my gosh, this is like 100% not what I thought it was going to be. I'm waking up, I'm hating my life. And really finding that path to what it is the actual underlying values are.
That's such a great point. I wish someone had told me that 30 years ago. But it is actually something I tell women in particular now. One of the lovely things about being in this role is that women come and ask for advice, women who are interested in public service. And often they'll say, I want to be a congressperson or I want to be a state senator. And I have over time learned exactly the point you made. And what I say is, well, maybe think not so much about who you want to be or what you want to be, but rather what you want to do. What is the motivating thing for you? What gives you joy? What gives you a sense of purpose? What do you
Yeah.
want to change in the world? And then once you've kind of landed on something there, and that can change over time, but once you've landed on what it is for you now, then figure out what the best path is. So it's exactly what you're saying is don't start with the path, start with the thing. And
Hmm.
I'm not even going to call it a goal because that's like the whole where do you want to be in 10 years piece. No, start with the thing that's motivating you and then figure out what the path is to accomplish that thing.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think is really interesting in your story that also in other interviews and places that I feel like you've referenced is this idea of navigating through your life without a quote unquote plan, allowing things to unfold. So I'm curious how now in hindsight, being able to see how all the pieces fit together, what
Hmm.
you think about taking that as an approach to figuring out how to exist in the world and find where you want to land.
That has just totally always been my approach. And I think it's my instinctive approach. It's not something that I sort of sat down and figured out or someone told me. It's my instinctive response to say, where am I now? How does this feel now? It's what I like. But, I want to keep going, or nope, this isn't it. And then kind of look around and say, okay, well, then what's the next thing? And that really is how I have made certainly all my professional decisions, like investment banking, Goldman Sachs. I did that because it was a great paycheck. And at the time, this is the early 80s, it was, that was the thing that my peers were going after. So woohoo, it was great that I got that. Did that, got there, I think fairly quickly realized that the culture wasn't for me, the work wasn't for me. I was in a 2-year program, so I stuck at the 2-year program. And then I kind of looked up and said, okay, what next? The law sounds really interesting. How about I go to law? That has always been the process for me. And it's worked pretty well. And I think organically, again, like if I had 20 years ago set out to be a politician, maybe I would have constructed a very different path. But as it turns out, that combination of experiences that I ended up with, including, the nonprofit experience to the end, it's been perfect. It set me up really well to do what I'm doing now. So I think it has something to do with doing the things that feel right, that authentic to whatever is your purpose again, and being okay with bumbling around and being okay with quote unquote wasting time. I just don't think any of it's wasted. Like I might have hated those 2 years at Goldman Sachs, but it was not wasted.
Yes. See, and I love that so much. And I feel like in a lot of ways, that framework is way ahead. Like, I feel like now culturally, that's where we've landed because the jobs that somebody can have for 30 years and then retire just literally don't exist. So now people are having to navigate things in that kind of leapfrog zone, going from thing to thing because there isn't a way that you can just stick it out, write it out like maybe our parents have done. At the time you were doing this, there must have been a lot of people looking at you sideways, like thinking like, "What? You're do
Well, I
what?"
mean, my well, my parents were already looking at me sideways because, again, for that generation of Indian parents, medicine or engineering were like the top two pathways, and then business kind of came after that. So even investment banking, as glamorous as that might have been here, to them was just a little bit like, oh, okay. And then law school was even more, oh, okay, really, all right. Here's the thing: I don't like to be bored, and I don't like to be unhappy. I suppose in some ways there's a flaw somewhere in the sense that I just am not somebody who's going to keep plugging away at something if it's not working for me. I was a physics major for a brief moment in time,
Oh.
and that ended quickly because it was not working for me.
I love that so much. That is not at all the way we've been programmed. However, I think when you strip away all of the social conditioning since like really like the industrial revolution, if you take all of that away, I feel like that's how we're wired to operate, right? Is like to move toward the
Hmm.
things that feel good, that feel aligned, that meet our needs, move away from the things that don't. And And that's how we are designed, I think, to negotiate our world. And then we have all of these constructed ideas, these frameworks that are placed on us. I firmly believe that we have this sort of internal knowing. And that's kind of the root of what boldness is like, are you going to have the audacity to really follow that internal knowing with the idea that you might be entering into a situation where you have to be a bumbling nerd for a long time that doesn't have their shit together and just kind of eat that from a humility standpoint in order to see and try and experiment and really find where you want to land, knowing that where you want to land today might not at all be where you want to be 5 years from now. I think that takes a lot of courage and bravery.
I love that knowing is boldness. I love that. I actually wrote it down. And the as you were talking, I was also thinking of this author of a little book that a mentor of mine gave me a long time ago. I'm going to forget the title of the book, but the author is Parker Palmer, and he talks about finding the dead. Again, he phrases it better, but basically that finding the dead ends is part of the process. There are these, like you talked about, the cultural constructs of you can be whatever you want to be, you can do whatever you want to do, and he's like, well, actually, you can't. I might love to be a concert pianist, and I will never be a concert pianist. And carving away the things that you don't want to do or don't do well is part of the process, but it's not explicitly encouraged, in part because, as you were talking about, all of these other constructs we have about what we should do, how we should be, what's important. And he talks a lot about kind of the indicia of success as being one of those things, right? Like, how do we culturally define what it means to be successful? What are the kind of boxes we find ourselves in because we do that? And it's hard. I mean, I think it's probably, I mean, it's not like I've let go of that. We all of us who are motivated, ambitious, I claim ambition, women are taught not to, but I claim
Right.
it. All of us who are ambitious still have that notion of what does it mean to be successful, and how do we navigate the point where that doesn't work for us anymore? Like that as the goal isn't going to work for us. But it's a continuous process, I think.
So let's go back to like 20 something you and how you would have defined success then versus now and how that's changed.
My 20-year-old me absolutely would have defined success as being in a position of power, with power possibly defined by access to financial resources as a part of it, not all of it, but a part of it. And so, being a partner at Goldman Sachs, even fast forward to my late 20 something self. So, I've graduated from college, I'm working at a law firm. Success was partnership. I was on the partnership track and becoming a partner at the firm. I was a litigator, so winning cases. Those very much would have been the ways that I would have defined success. How do I define it now? Feeling that I've made a difference for the people that I'm working for and with, on the causes that I'm working on. Frankly, even if it's not a giant difference that other people don't see, I think that's the other piece. It's like the definition of success as something that others can see is also part of it. And that's where title and that kind of thing comes into it.
Right.
I've really more and more let go of it. Again, not completely, but more and more. And then I think success for me is very much about my kids. And to be honest, my kids being thriving and learning and growing and in love and, all of those things. So
Hmm.
that is, at this point in my life, actually far more important to me than the professional success. But the professional success is important too, because I have a whole life that's separate from my life as a mom, or in addition to my life as a mom. And I need all of those pieces in order for me to feel fulfilled, and
Right.
purposeful.
What's interesting to me is it sounds like the younger version of you, which I think we all definitely grapple with, is very much placing the power in other people's hands, right? So success
Yep.
is defined by other decisions that people make about my deservedness and moving through the world that way, which I feel like we've all definitely lived in that box. And then figuring out, how do you orient towards something that is much more internal? How do I feel about the work that I'm doing and the impact I'm having and all of that? So and this is a question like I've been wrestling with myself, because a lot of times I think as people make that trajectory oftentimes it's after they've achieved the external success on some level to then say, okay, well, now I'm going to really prioritize my internal world. And I wonder if it's possible to prioritize that internal without ever having those internal markers. And I'm sure some people can do it, but like, let's say for the ambitious person, because, like, for example, I don't think Maslow's hierarchy of needs is 100% valid, because if that was true, you wouldn't have starving poets, right? That like
Right.
some people are just truly like they are needing this self-actualization expression before even things like food and shelter. But I do feel like a lot of times there is a kind of order to the way that we prioritize our internal knowing for a lot of us who are already in the stance with the external. I do also think I have met a couple just like total oddball, otherworldly people who have never given a fuck and they won't give a fuck. And I'm like, I love you. I 100% cannot relate to you on any level, but like, can I pick it up through osmosis? Because that would be delightful. So what do you, I mean, what do you think about that? Like, is it something we have to go through to arrive there? Is it something that you feel like there would have been something you could say to your version of yourself in the past that would have helped get her there sooner and maybe without some of the external accolades?
I don't think I could have gotten there without it. I think it was absolutely an important part for me. I suppose it's hard for me to look back and envision a different path, and it goes side by side with the fact that I have very few regrets about things, even things that turned out really badly, because we all are who we are in the moment that we're in, with all of the baggage and the history that we bring to it, whether it's our relationship with our parents or our relationships with our siblings, or you name it, any number of other things. That's who we are in that moment. And then we're going to navigate that moment as best we can. So for the mistakes I've made, I'm pretty forgiving of myself. It's like that was, seems to me that was the best that I could have done in that moment. And sure, I wish that I had more knowledge or more self-confidence or this, that, or the other thing that might have led me to make a different decision or a different choice. But that's not what it was.
Mhm.
So yeah, I do think it's possible though. I mean, it's like the people you talked about, the ones who like genuinely from the
Right.
get-go didn't give a fuck, right?
Yeah.
Great. That's who they were in that moment. And that's not who I was in that moment.
Right. Yeah, I know. I'm just like, wow, I love that so much. And I think about how free I would have been because I did have an internal knowing, but I was also always in the stance of not enoughness and needing to prove enoughness. And I think this also goes back to being somebody who's othered, who's non-dominant culture, who's swimming in these environments that aren't made for us, that a lot of times there is this feeling of performativity because we are just trying to belong on some level. And sometimes that even means, I think, erasing temporarily the things that make us really magical and amazing, which are our differences. Like I remember I had a friend in grade school who was Lebanese. She would always roll her eyes whenever her mom would make her lunch. She would open up her lunch and it was always
Hmm.
like this sigh thing. And I was the person that was like, can I trade you lunches? Because I loved like, and I wish I remember what the dish was, but it was some sort of sour yogurt, like fermented deliciousness in her sandwiches that I was just like, yep, 100% will trade you the turkey and cheese basic bitch energy sandwich that my mom made me. Love you, mom. For that, 100%. But I think a lot of us go through that journey of in belonging, having somewhat of an erasure that we're reconciling with.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I know it for me, that enoughness, and certainly, going back to 16-year-old me arriving in Pennsylvania, dressed for Pennsylvania winter, and it's August. you know, I believe
Oh.
I was very proud of my corduroys and my turtleneck, and it was late August in Pennsylvania, not the right attire. Um, so, I think that not enoughness, absolutely, and I think the continuing journey for me and for many, even this notion of finding purpose and creating change. Sometimes I wonder there's still a feeling of not enoughness there, right? It's not enough just to be us. And I think there's a little bit of American culture and maybe Western culture that this has to do with it. that what you do, something about what you do
Yes.
matters a lot. And I'm jumping thoughts a little bit here, but I'm envisioning the way that in India, people can spend time together just sitting in a room, and they might have some initial, how are you? How's it going? And then they might sit quietly, just together, just being together. That never happens here. And to me, there's
Yeah.
something similar about that. Like it's okay in that environment, that culture, just to be us. We don't have to be entertaining. We don't have to be clever. We don't have to make great conversation. We're just human beings sitting here in this space together.
Mm.
And that's correlated to me with this idea that there's still the sense that we're just not enough just being us. We've got to be doing something. We've got to be adding value in some other way than just being. I'm still on that journey. Every day I feel like I'm on that journey of, this is all great. It gives me purpose. I find it really interesting. It's important. And it doesn't have to be the measure of who I am as a person.
Right. I completely resonate with that because one of my biggest struggles is I'm generally like a pretty up person. Like I'm the silver lining. My friends like make fun of me because I have to work hard to not like Pollyanna the situation, not like say, "Oh, but here's the gift in that," right? And just allow people to have room for their emotions because that's just the way my brain works. Is like, "Oh, this will be
Yeah.
great because of I learned this or we can implement this or this emotion is teaching me something." That kind of like quick ability to reframe. But the part of it that I really struggle with is like this feeling of I will slide into depression if I'm not making something. And it's not enough to make something that only I'm going to see. I have to make something that I perceive as going to have an impact. And this has been, I feel like deeply an Achilles heel of mine because it's always swimming upstream with energy with this dance of the external, right? Because if my self worth is determined by the positive impact it has on others, I need that reaction from others. And I'm curious for you how this manifests. But for me, like I will ask people, like with a photograph, or a podcast episode, I will ask people who have no frame of reference, no ability to discern good from bad, nothing. And I will ask them, like a needy 5-year-old, did you think it was good? Like, no, but really, like, what did you think? And I catch myself having this like deep, thirsty energy for approval because there is something that's so intrinsically tied there that I really want to unwind.
Yes. Yes to all of that. And, unfortunately, as an elected leader, not everybody will actually tell you. So I have this constant niggling sense that, oh, these things are going really badly, but no one's actually telling me.
Right.
So, and I will say that politics, with that lens, politics is a bit of an odd enterprise because there is a way in which you are constantly asking for approval, right? Not
Mhm.
explicitly, but implicitly, because you have to run. It's like a giant, I don't want to say popularity contest, but you have to run every 2 or 4 years or 6 years if you're lucky enough to be in the US Senate. You have
Right.
to run for office.
Yeah.
And you're literally going out there and saying to people, here's who I am, here's what I've done, here's what I do, and will you give me your approval by voting for me?
And people have to like you and trust you and believe you and think that you're attractive enough to do the job. Like all the weird decisions that people make, that's a part of the game. And that's always been a part to me that's like really wonky about the political system is that the
Hmm.
studies where it's like 5-year-olds can predict presidential elections based on pictures. Um
Oh, God, that's depressing.
I know. It's just like, because even though we believe that we're super intellectual, there's so much of our base instincts, the way we make decisions, that can be as capricious as something like that.
Yep, absolutely. As a candidate, you run into that every time you knock on a door. So I did a fair amount of door knocking, which means going up to a stranger's door. As a person of color, there are many layers of concern, fear, even that attach to an enterprise like that.
Yeah.
And just the sense that you open that door and then someone looks at you and they make an immediate judgment. They do. You can often see that judgment happening in their eyes and their face as they're in front of you at that door. I do think part of that, people make decisions and judgments based on appearance, let's say. Some of that is changing as a different range of appearances is appearing on the political scene, right? I think that's a wonderful thing. We've seen it happen in Portland and Multnomah County just over the last several years. The Multnomah County Commission is all women. We are all women. I think we're one of the few all women county commissions in the country. We're also majority women of color. And just last week, we had this amazing experience of a woman who was coming to testify in front of us about something. And she started her testimony, and then she kind of stopped and she looked down at her page, and then she looked up and she was clearly composing herself. And she said, "Oh my God, I didn't know what it would feel like to address an all woman board of commissioners." That the visual of seeing all women was so striking to her. So I
Mhm.
guess that's a long way of saying yes, and it's my hope that that internal image that people have of leaders or people of any kind is changing as our society and culture becomes more and more diverse in terms of who's doing what where.
Yes, and such a great example of why that kind of representation matters so much, to have people who reflect your experience, to be able to trust them to work on your behalf. I just have so much empathy for people who really want to trust the political process, but they don't have any history or experience of people really wanting to empathize with their position and really work on their behalf. So there's this inherent mistrust of the political process and whether or not they can have an impact or anything like that because they've seen how it's functioned. And then when you see that these representations that are coming and the movements that seem like they are having more of an impact, I think it's just creating more belief in the process altogether and one's role in it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think the other thing that's happening is as we have more women, more people of color, there's also to go back to something you started with, there's also more room for each of us to be genuinely who we are.
Yes.
That when it's just one of you, like I'm thinking back to my 20-year-old self again at Goldman Sachs, I think I may have been one of two people of color, one of few women. The women partners at that time didn't have photos of their families behind them, only the men did because they were supposed to be, I don't know, male like, I suppose, or
Right.
something, armored up. They couldn't talk about their families, the men could. It was very difficult to be authentic and genuine. Now it comes up a lot in terms of expressing emotion, for example, right? It used to be that, and it still is to a significant degree, don't get me wrong. I think women still get whacked for expressing emotion. I am fairly quick to emotion. I will tear up rather quickly. And at first, when I started on the board, we sit at a dais, and I was so embarrassed about the fact that I was tearing up. And somewhere over the past 3 years, I've gotten over it. I stop apologizing for it. Going back to the question of trust, if people can see vulnerability and authenticity, that also builds trust as opposed to
Yes.
some sort of artificial creation of this kind of non-human, perfect, uh, I don't know, unemotional person.
The robot politicians that
Yeah.
yeah.
I was talking to a group of Multnomah County employees earlier this week, last week, I can't remember. And they said, we're asking that you bring Susheela, not necessarily Commissioner Jayapal, although we know that you're also Commissioner Jayapal, but we're asking that you be here as Susheela. And I loved that. It was such a relief, frankly. It's like,
Mm.
yes, that's easier for me and it works better for you as well. Let's do that. Let's do that.
I love that because I met you as Sushila, also was always aware of your role. And prior to me having a partner that was very much around politics, I had this very strong distancing. Like I realized I literally didn't think of politicians as humans with lives, right? Like you think of them as a podium and then that's it. And then starting to meet people just in casual situations at a farmer's market, at a birthday party where we're all playing weird wackadoodle games together, that it's just like, wow, they're all real people with these real sets of emotions and experiences that are constantly being characterized in a two-dimensional way. That's sort of the expectations that we have for them, is to not have a full range of emotions and a full range of experiences or reactions, we don't create room or space for them to mess up or to change their mind. Having these types of interactions, it's made me so much more grateful for people like you being in these roles because it just seems like this might sound mildly depressive, but it just seems like there is so much more pressure and like it just seems like the upside of the role seems a lot smaller than all of the massive stuff that it comes with. And that kind of the decorum that one has to have versus the humanity that one of course has. I guess kind of a question in here is like, how do you balance that and try to show up authentically in a world that doesn't necessarily even want your full humanity brought to everything that you do?
Yeah, gosh, there's so many layers to that question. I mean, I think questions about race come into that question, a world that doesn't necessarily want your full humanity brought to everything
Hmm.
that you do. I guess on a more straightforward level, as I get older, it is easier to be authentic than to not be authentic. There's just a way in which in my younger life, I was striving to be some image that I had of how I was supposed to be. Over time, just kind of came to the recognition that, gosh, that's really hard. That's really hard work to be armored. I very much, my young professional life, very armored because always around men, older white men. And so definitely felt that I had to be tough. I had to prove I was tough. I think in some ways it was maybe stepping off law and going into nonprofit work in a situation where I was often in volunteer roles, leadership, but volunteers. So, chairing boards and things like that. And the pressure kind of lifted a little bit. It gave me more room when I
Mm.
didn't feel as if I was constantly being measured, right? Because losing a job is a big deal. If I flame out, in other capacities, I could say to myself, all right, well, that was okay. At least I still have a livelihood and my kids aren't still going to be housed and all of that. So I think there was a way in which that lifted the pressure and then just naturally, authentically, organically feeling that relief of not being armored up and going, oh, I like that. So if I feel myself going back to armor, I'm going to remember that it felt a lot better to just be who I am and to be authentic and be vulnerable. And that
Yeah.
allows me to come back.
That to me sounds like coming back to this remembering of who you are, right? That internal
Hmm.
knowing, like it's really a process of remembering after being gaslit by all these different external forces. And also, when I think about having met like the governor, for example, the governor of Oregon, and I met her before that role. And I met her in these situations where it was just Kate, I realize, that you're not supposed to, when you're talking about someone or whatever, you're supposed to address them by their role. But to your point, it was this sort of, I met this person and we've had multiple conversations, and I just saw, like, the quirky side, the excitement about the shoes that, she had on, and like all of this stuff that's like just humanity. And then seeing the kind of deluge of criticism and also like going to parties and having people who have never met her as an individual have these really intense, often scathing opinions that are formulated based on this two-dimensional idea of what a governor should be and how they should act and what they should do and the decisions they should make. And also this human who's in this role, whether or not they like her, whether what they think about how she's reacting emotionally or things like that. It just all seems so hard, like an uphill battle to continually show up without armor, or I guess with the least amount of armor possible to do that job. And I guess my question with you is like, do you feel like the longer you're in it, does it take more effort to retain that kind of openness and vulnerability and even emotionality when it's sort of these compounding forces over time of the criticality and just the criticism, I think?
Yeah. Well, I think I should be clear when I say that there are plenty of times when armor is required. So it's not
Mhm.
as if I wander around the world unarmored all the time.
Right.
And it's sort of like vulnerability, right? We want to be authentic, we want to be vulnerable, but we want to do it in ways that are, for example, not performative or not harmful to the person that you are with. Like you were always making judgments about the degree of vulnerabilities, shall we say, that's appropriate to the situation. So I've certainly been situations where someone is being, let's say, disrespectful, rude. I don't allow it. I particularly don't allow it when it's directed to somebody else, but I also don't allow it when it's directed to me. And I suppose that's a form of armor, but it's also true to who I am. I mean, it's not pretend. It's like, oh yeah, no, being quiet, or you pointed out that I was small of stature, being open to emotion also doesn't mean that I'm going to let myself be run over.
Right.
So it's like we can't survive in the world if we don't have a skin, for example, right? We do have to figure out how to balance those things. And then it's a question of whether it gets harder. I don't think I've been doing it long enough to know. I've been doing it for 3 years. I'm a county commissioner. There's no comparison between the sort of public facing nature of the governor's job and my job. So different levels of politics give you different levels of that kind of exposure and that kind of criticism. And it's not just politics. I mean, that was the other thing I was thinking as you were talking, is that we are in this moment, and we just didn't arrive here suddenly. We arrived over a period of time where we're not recognizing the humanity of others, where there's a lot of othering going on. Listen to how folks talk about people experiencing houselessness, listen to some of the discourse. Well, this back in politics, I guess I'm talking about Congress, but there's just a lot of othering and bunkering in our little pods that's happening right now. And
Yeah.
it's disturbing. It is really disturbing. And I wish I had some sort of prescription for how we get out of it. I'm not sure I do, but I think at least recognizing that it's happening and recognizing that it's wrong and that's moving us in the wrong direction is a place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing I was thinking is like, I would love to be there in that moment when you are correcting someone. What does that sound like? What is that moment where somebody has like firmly stepped out of line, either with you or somebody else? What is that interaction that happens?
I'm not sure. You should talk to somebody on my team. They can probably describe it for you better than I can. I think if I were to sit outside myself and say, what do I look like in that moment? I think firm, just firm, maybe like your teacher from grade school or something, grounded, and maybe it comes back to a knowing, like I don't accept this. I don't accept it. I don't accept it from myself. I don't accept it from you. I can give an example. There was a meeting in which somebody was very, very critical of some Multnomah County staff, to accuse them of lying. I sometimes use hand gestures. I've discovered that they can be very helpful. Hand gesture, we're going to stop. I should have started this meeting by laying out some ground rules. And one of those ground rules is that we don't call people names. We focus on the issue at hand. And I'm going to expect that from you. And that took care of it. So that's kind of what it looks like. It tends to be quiet. I have on occasion resorted to slamming my hand on a desk, because then, you have to gauge, like,
Yeah.
what's it going to take in this moment? And I've had a couple of moments where it required making a noise and physicality. I think as small people, we need to figure out how to use our bodies more. And that's something I've developed over time is, as a small person, how do I use my physicality to also interrupt something like that? So
Yes, because that idea of taking up space, you have developed I think, some serious frameworks that can help us think about, okay, as somebody who's maybe unassuming, as somebody who is small in stature, or even, I mean, aside from a lot of that stuff, I think oftentimes you can walk into rooms where, because of whatever kind of monocultural is happening, they're not going to see you. They're not going to respect you. In their mind, you are taking up no space. So, what are some of the ways that you personally have cultivated to claim that space and claim that energy?
I actually have a mantra for this. And it doesn't always work. Like, working to me is if it makes me feel present and taking up space, that is 90% of the battle. Does it always work to mitigate, to get people who refuse to see someone like me to see me? No,
Mhm.
they've got their own stuff to work out. But I do have a mantra, and it's height, depth, and breadth. It's a reminder when we, again, as women, we are acculturated sometimes to not take up our space. So height, depth, breadth to me is a reminder to really literally stand tall, feel my shoulders, feel my depth. And I don't think anybody else sees me expand. It's not like I physically expand, but I think for me, it's a technique to just remind myself to insist on taking up my space.
One of my favorite things about you is that you were just like, "I'm gonna have fun with this, and I'm gonna make a video to, like, teach people how to say my name. And I'm gonna" like, that is still I feel like that's one of, like, the most boss moves to make it instead of it being like an othering, shame-filled kind of zone, which it also inhabits, like, feeling like you're inherently othered because people they're nervous about pronunciation, they don't know all of these things. That again, in that kind of holding space and claiming power, you're just like, "I'm gonna put out a video for all of you. We're gonna have fun with it." It just makes my heart so happy.
I love that video, but I have to give all credit for that video to my co-star, Rudy. You've seen it, so you know that I did it with I think Rudy was 9 or 10 at the time. The son of one of our Multnomah County employees. And the point was to, aside from being fun, I think that there was a point to having a child say my name. It was a way of saying, don't be intimidated by this. Because I think some people look at it and are just intimidated. So a way of saying, don't be intimidated. It was also a way of saying, make the effort.
Mhm.
Because
Yes.
there's another category of people who just don't even try. It's like, no, you can try. You can ask. If you don't know how to say my name, ask. I'm not going to be offended. In fact, I would love it if you would ask. There were some ideas behind it, and then it was just fun. And he is an absolute precocious charmer. So it was a delight. I was a little nervous about how it was going to go, but he made it okay.
Yes. Well, and I think that a lot of times there's this misconception that just because the execution of something has levity and has fun and seems simple doesn't mean that the conceptual underpinnings aren't like there with force. And I think one of the things that I responded to so much about this video that we'll link in the show notes is that there are these undercurrent and these threads that are very clear about the idea of othering, about the idea of trying. It's not that we should all know magically how to pronounce everyone's names, but I think it does reveal this kind of mono-ethnic social circle that a lot of people find themselves in and being nervous or scared about somebody who presents a different cultural vantage point. And so I think all of those things are very there. And because of the way it was presented, there is this delightfully disarming quality that makes it deeply accessible for people to be able to engage with the content and have fun with it without feeling like it is this patronizing sort of thing, that they are open to it and have fun, but also as a byproduct, really learn how to say your name.
Exactly. I guess a phrase, a phrase that I think has become more in currency the past few years, the calling in. I think the
Mhm.
idea is the calling in, right? I don't want to shame anybody. I'm not yelling at anybody. And I'm saying, here's a chance for you to learn something and let's do it together. And names are important.
Yes.
Names are really important. They carry a lot of cultural weight. They carry a lot of identity. And I think the least we can do is figure out how to say somebody's name.
Yes, and I think for a lot of us kiddos that are non-dominant culture, there's a lot of stickiness around names. Like I know for
Yeah.
me, it was always whenever there was a substitute teacher, it just my stomach sank because there was always going to be this round of pronunciations because my name is long enough that it gets cut off. And it was just always this thing that, the Sues and the Sallys and the Beths never had to deal with. And it's just these little, I think that's so much of the experience, like where this questioning of worth comes from for people who are identity rich, is that It's the stacking of all of these small moments over time that just make it so clear to you that you are not like other people around you. And then the compounding effect that has on your sense of belonging, your sense of self-esteem, and your sense of self-worth.
Yes. And I have those moments all the time and have had for the last 40 years, right? Ever since I came here. I mean, I remember in college, again, all of those comments that now I would understand as microaggressions, like, ooh, what kind of name is that? Or what is that? What are you? Oh, that's an interesting. I mean, there's any a range of comments about the names and the awkward pause when someone's going down a list and you see them staring at the list and you're like, yep, that's me. That's me
Yeah.
coming up next.
You just raise your hand preemptively.
Well,
Here.
I used to, and now, frankly, I don't because I'm going to give them the opportunity to try. And there are so many ways in which, often unintentionally, the reaction to maybe trying and getting it wrong or stumbling, the awkward little laugh. There's so many ways in which I think we still hear those of us with these beautiful names.
Mhm.
We still hear that othering very much so, and I love the way you described it as a layering on. Because absolutely, in college, it might have been my name. It might have been questions about the dot that many Indian women wear on their foreheads. But the way that it's phrased, there can be a genuine desire for learning, or there can be a very othering kind of curiosity. And I think we hear it. We know
Oh,
it when we
yeah.
hear it. Questions about whether we rode elephants for transportation in India. In 1979, no, we did not. We did not. And I can laugh about it now, but absolutely, as a young person and continuing on, the way in which that tells you definitively that you don't belong is very real and runs very deep.
So, one thing I really wanted to touch on, going back to sort of this idea of authenticity and really sharing your story, is you shared publicly about your abortion. I think it hasn't been a deeply politicized topic, but I think that it comes in waves. Right now, there's, of course, so much culturally happening that really is quite scary when we talk about rights and all of this. And so I'm curious for you about the context to deciding that you were going to share this moment in your life.
Yeah, it was such an interesting experience. I have often thought about the fact and noticed the fact that in our conversation about abortion, we focus on the really, really difficult stories, stories of women who can't afford to have a child, of disorders or health issues, and rape and incest, just traumatic situations. And as I say in my story, mine was not like that. Mine, I could have had a child. I was engaged to be married. We had the resources. I wasn't sick, as everything seemed to be going fine. And it has always struck me when I hear us talk about abortion like that we're still stigmatizing it by saying
Yes.
that there's kind of an okay set of circumstances or a better set of circumstances. And if we in the pro-choice reproductive rights movement truly believe that it's a right for every person to have control of their body, then we should be laying out the full range of circumstances in which it can happen. So that's the intellectual piece. It's like, this is what I've been thinking, but I never could figure out how to introduce the topic. I'm a writer, so I'm thinking about, like, what's my hook, what's my in to the story. And I read something, and I wish I could remember her name because I've got to credit her, but I read a piece by a writer who talked about her story, and it had the perfect hook that just allowed me to enter it. So that's how it happened. And literally, I wrote it. I had the thought. I wrote it in about 10 minutes, and then it was very hard to actually push
Mm.
send. It surprised me how hard it was because I don't feel that I've had a sense of shame about having had an abortion. I didn't feel racked with guilt at the time. And yet something about our culture obviously made me very scared about sharing it. Plus the fact that really it's a private thing and I shouldn't have to share it. None of us should have to. I do it in service of the movement, but none of us
Mhm.
should have to. So it was a very interesting thing to me to share it. so many women responded saying, yeah, that was my story too. And that was why I did it, because her story helped me. And I hope that by sharing my story, it would allow others to be in comfort with their choices. Mona El-Tahawi. And I wanted to remember the phrase she used that unlocked it for me. And it was, because I chose myself. Right. And that phrase was so powerful to me, both because, as I said, it allowed me an in to telling the story, and because I think as women, we continue to be told that we can't choose ourselves, that there's always some other person, some other thing, some other that's not enough to choose ourselves. And that's not true. Telling my story was both about abortion and about the bigger, we choose ourselves. As human beings, we have the right to choose ourselves, and we have the right to live in a world that allows us to choose ourselves and that rewards us for choosing ourselves as opposed to punishes us for choosing ourselves.
Yeah. Just hearing you talk about that, it gave me goosebumps because I feel like there's something so powerful about having your experience reflected back to you, especially around things that are very shame-filled. But then also because of the tremendous courage it takes as a public person to share something when you know that it will exist for people to continually have opinions about. And this is something that I have definitely dealt with myself, right? Where it's just like, I feel this deep drive. Like, this is really me honoring myself, is sharing this thing that I shouldn't have to share, but I'm going to share it for that person out there that needs to hear it. And also knowing that in order to reach that person, it has to be available for whomever may come into contact with it, knowing that some of those people are going to have malicious intent, are going to be very loud and trolly and vocal. I really think that it's such an amazing thing that not a lot of us do because it is really tough to be out there. I think about it's like the armadillo that's just like laying on its back. And you're just like, "Hey, are you going to pet me or something else? I don't know, but I'm here and I'm open." And that is just such a deeply vulnerable but also beautiful place to be when you know that the benefit of that is to help other people who might be socially isolated, who might be physically isolated, feel seen and validated in that experience that you share.
I love that armadillo metaphor because we're back to armor, right? I mean,
Mhm.
armadillos are armored. They have all of that shell, and yeah, lying on its belly, it's exposing its unarmored part. I think all of that, it just resonates so much for me. I think there was a way in which the hardest part of it was pressing the button, and I cried after I hit send, which just surprised me again. I didn't when I entered into that enterprise, I didn't think it was going to be that hard for me. Again, because I've had this perception that no, it was fine. It was, it's no big deal. I've never had. So it was definitely hard. I think there's a way in which it was probably cathartic. So I think that allowed me to work some stuff out that I didn't know I was
Yeah.
carrying, right? And then mostly, I will say that the reaction, I've just been lucky. I think most of the reaction has just been just validated my decision to do that, because I really do think that it has helped others who've had the same experience.
Right. And that is the thing. I feel like that's the secret that I want everybody to know is that usually, I mean, I can't speak for all circumstances, but usually that's exactly what happens. Is that any sort of negativity is so overshadowed by the gratitude and the people who are just sending messages that are like, "I'm so grateful that you did this. Thank you so much. This is my experience," and all of that sharing that then happens as a result. And and yeah, I mean, it's not even like, to me, and I'm thinking about particularly there was a video where I shared my most deep embedded shame ever, which had to do with internalized racism that I carried. And I mean, and still carry, but have now been able finally for the first time to start to work through that in the last couple years, but really sharing that experience. And I mean, I still, like a year and a half later, there are people who are just now finding that video that are writing these multiple page comments about what they're living through and all of this. And it's such a privilege, I think, to live in a time where we can be so deeply connected instantly in whatever it is we're going through, provided that other people are being vulnerable and sharing what their experiences are.
That's so amazing that you were able to do that. There's just so much isolation in the world. We're all to some extent sitting in our, even setting aside COVID isolation, which is literal, but even before that, there's an extent to which we all think that what we are experiencing is unique to ourselves. Many things are. We are all unique human beings, but also the places of shame and pain and feeling othered. I just think there's so much of that, and it's so hard to find ways to break through, and it's so important. I mean, that's talking about going back to when you were talking about the criticism and the ways in which politicians are viewed as two-dimensional human beings and their humanity is stripped away. The more we can find the shared experience, the less we can not recognize the humanity in each other. That sounds kind of Pollyanna-ish, I know.
I love a good Pollyanna moment, though.
I happen to believe it. I actually believe it.
Yes. Okay. So there's one thing I quickly want to touch on before I have one like total curveball question for you. So it's this idea of the power of introversion. One of the things that I love is you are such a fabulous example of somebody who is a self-professed introvert who is out there owning it and doing the thing, but not necessarily in this, big razzle dazzle, I need to entertain everybody kind of energy that some of us have, for better or for worse, and really finding your own way through things, your own way to power, your own way to presence and public speaking and all of these things, but in a way that feels authentically honoring this introversion that you have. I'm curious what you think as an introvert, but I think that there's like this weird energy around introversion. Like for some reason, we think that extroverts are where it's at. And to me, I'm just like, are you kidding me? Like all the people in my life that really have something deep and meaningful and fascinating to say, 10 out of 10 introverts. So I don't know why our culture is like so fixated on this idea of like the razzle dazzle showboats of the world.
That's it. Yeah, I love that way of describing it. There is a weird energy around it. It's as if it's like people will say, "Oh, he's an introvert, but he's great."
Right.
There's like a but after it. And I do think for a long time that also was a source of insecurity for me, the fact that I was an introvert. Well, first of all, I think there's some myths about introversion, and I think one of them is that introverts don't like people. Like we're not. There's a word for people who don't like people that's eluding me right now, but it's not that we don't like people. It's that we need, we draw energy from being alone. And so we need time alone as well. I think over time, that's what I've recognized. I love people. I actually loved campaigning. I love talking to people, but I like doing it one-on-one. Put me in a room of 40 people and I'm going to start to get a little bit overwhelmed. That's a lot for me. I've learned how to manage it. You have to, as in any number of roles that I've been in, you've had to learn how to manage it. I just increasingly have seen it as a source of strength. I think that we need a lot more listeners in the world,
Yes.
that we are all busy talking over each other to a great extent, and that we need more listening. I've also discovered there's power in being the person who doesn't talk a lot, because actually when you then talk, people do pay more attention, so I've kind of learned to harness that power. And yeah, I talk about it a lot because again, it's I suppose in a very different way, it's like sharing my abortion story. I do a lot of panels to women who are thinking about politics or elected office. And I know that like 30% of them are introverts, and they're either pretending that they're not, and it's exhausting them, or they think they can't do this because they're introverts. And I just want them to know that they absolutely can, that there are things they got to learn how to manage. When I was campaigning, I was very specific with my team. I said, I am an introvert. That means I need downtime. So you can pack my day for 10, 12 hours, but just make sure that I can get out for my run, that I've got like a half hour every now and then to just go off by myself. We figure out techniques for ourselves on all sorts of things that we know we need. I appreciate your picking up on that, because it is actually, I'm on a bit of a mission to tell, especially women who are introverts, that does not limit them in any way whatsoever. In fact, I think if you shook the political tree, you'd find an awful lot of introverts dropping down.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of what I talk about also, like in terms of neurodivergence, is like when I was able to really leverage things for the superpower that they are, and like you being an introvert is a superpower. It's like the difference between, like the superheroes in X-Men or whatever, that like their superpower is fire, but first they're just lighting everything up, including their homes. And it's like this, it's the kind
I
of
love
moment.
that.
But then when they get the skills to be able to cultivate it and aim it and understand it, then that's when really they're able to embody that full power. And I think so much of that framing of it is what gives us the ability to control. So I love that what you're saying is like, this is the container it needs to live in, and disclosing and creating expectations and creating a life that works for that so you can leverage it for the superpower that it is, and also do it in a way that's not burning out your adrenals and not powering through until you're ground into dust, because you are saying that this is the house that it needs to live in. Definitely when it comes to disclosure around things, I also have to be mindful that some people might not feel comfortable really saying, like, this is who I am and this is who I operate. But I also think there's a big strength in being able to frame that for people so the expectations are really aligned. And then you have that freedom to really show up in your most authentic way.
I love that description of it as a container, and this is the house. And I think that all kinds of qualities benefit from that treatment, right? Some of my best friends are extroverts. And I think that thoughtful folks also know how to modulate their extroversion. So
Mhm.
they know how to adapt and respond just in the way that I modulate my introversion. I think that folks do the same with extroversion and with all kinds of other qualities. It's a matter of knowing, owning, and then adapting as appropriate.
Yes. Okay. So, curveball question. What is like the silliest, weirdo ish, like you are just your hair's down, you're having fun, the part of you that's not a politician? Like, what would we come over and see you geeking out about?
Well, funny you should ask. Had you been in this very room last night, you would have seen me. Yeah, I thought it was silly. I was watching. Do you know who DJ Anjali is?
Yes, I love her.
Anjali was performing at a fundraiser that I dropped in on virtually, and she was doing her teaching Bollywood. So I was in my suit that I had been wearing that day because I got home right in time for the thing. And I am a terrible dancer. Oh my god, I'm such a bad dancer. Trying to do the Bollywood. So there's one
Yay!
example. There's one example.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. That's just such a perfect also representation of like how you show up in the world. Power suits and like Bollywood vibes.
The camera was off. I do have the camera was very much off.
Yes, we got to draw a line somewhere. Oh my gosh,
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
love that so much. That makes me happy, and it also reminds me, like I'm always most joyous when I'm dancing. And years and years and years ago, when I first met her, it was at an event where she was teaching Bhangra, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And yeah, and it's been hard, with COVID, but I
Yeah.
gotta
It's
check
such
in
a
on
full
that.
body thing. I mean,
Yes.
it's just so joyful and full body, and it was frankly the perfect thing to end my day with yesterday.
Oh my gosh. That makes me so happy. Okay, are you ready for the two
Yeah.
speed round?
Sure.
All right. Only rule is you cannot overthink it. If you were like to wave a magic wand, but you could only change one thing, you could change it for all humanity, but it's just the one. What would you change? What knowledge would you instill? Like, what is that one thing that you would do if you had the power?
Oh my gosh. So this, how can I not overthink this? That's
Right.
impossible. I have to say, this is going to be a very pragmatic response as opposed to a lovely, beautiful response. I
Uh-huh.
would make sure everyone had at a home, had housing.
Mhm.
This is just so top of mind for me right now. I can't be more philosophical than that. I wish I could wave a magic wand and everybody would have housing.
I feel like no matter where you are existing in the world right now, there is no way to not be witnessing this issue. But like, I feel like it's one of those wicked problems that hopefully there will be a way to solve it in a very like visceral way that we haven't seen yet that maybe can happen?
I have to believe there is. I mean, I don't think that I could do this. I don't think I could do this if I didn't think that at least progress. Can I, will it be
Yes.
solved in my lifetime? Big ask. But progress.
Yes, I love that. Okay, so what is an underrated dance move that we should all be coming back to?
Goodness me. I'm gonna say disco, baby.
Ooh, are we talking like the
Like
classic?
Saturday Night
Yeah.
Live,
Mhm.
yeah, John Travolta.
Okay, I've
Yes.
never seen that not bring joy to somebody's face. So
There you go.
I'm behind you on that one.
And maybe the white suit as well.
Oh, yeah, that makes me nervous with drinking and dancing, but you come out with like a tie-dye equivalent at the end.
There
So
you go.
either way everybody wins. Okay, why should people get into politics or being elected officials in some capacity?
To serve. It's not the only way to serve, but to serve and to feel purpose.
I love that. Okay, so flashback, 16 years old,
Mhm.
coming to the US. What was like that one thing that you saw like your peers, whatever, doing that you were just like, what? You Americans are weird AF.
I'm just going to say what comes to mind, even though I'm not sure it actually answers your question. It's not what all my peers were doing. I don't want to give that impression at all. But my very first meeting in my dorm, the hall, one of my fellow students showed up dressed in nothing but a fishnet. You just have to remember that I was 16 years old and I had come here from Indonesia. And I literally, after that, called my mom, and it took $12 in quarters to do so. I was like, Mom, she was just wearing a fishnet. That was it. So I didn't think all Americans did it, but it did instill in me some concern about how I was going to fare
You're like,
in this
what have
world.
I gotten myself into?
Exactly.
Meanwhile, you
Exactly.
and your turtlenecks in August. Yeah, I can
Yes.
see that.
That's right. Quite the opposite.
Yes. What is something that at the time you thought was a failure, but now you realize was a gift?
Actually, it was that first job at Goldman Sachs. I felt a complete and utter failure. What was expected of me was clearly not what I was delivering. And I just gutted it out for 2 years feeling that way.
Mhm.
And it was such a gift. Had I felt successful, might I have continued? Because of the value
Right.
that I attached to success, possibly. And I possibly could have led me down a different path. And it was frankly, the first time I felt I failed at anything.
Mm.
And I'm glad it happened. That's early. I think 20. 20
Yeah.
feels like fairly early to feel like you failed at something. I just think it like made me realize that I would survive. It was going to be unpleasant and hard and all of that, but I would survive. On the professional side, that is the experience that I look at and go, yeah, you survived that. Everything else is going to be okay. So
Yes. And I feel like we all need those moments to experience for ourselves. And then
yeah,
you kind of get that accumulation where you start to become more powerful in your skin because you realize you're resilient. Whereas before then, you don't have any like life proof that you're actually
yep,
resilient. So you really feel
yep,
like anything can take
exactly.
you down. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So lastly, what does it
Mhm.
mean to be bold?
I love the title of your podcast, I might say. To me, it means all of the things that we have been talking about. Although I took a new one away, which is the knowing. But really, to me, it means being grounded in who you are. And while not always necessarily, everybody carries insecurity, but being grounded with who you are and just putting that out into the world. That's what being bold means to me.
I love that. Thank you so much for spending your time with us, and just your energy is so amazing, and how grounded and just fabulous you are. I feel like is just I mean I've felt like this from the moment I met you. Like it's just very inspiring to look forward to a potential version of myself that is grounded in the knowing of who I am, that's having a beautiful impact and is really prioritizing those core values. And I see you living that. And yeah, it just makes me so happy and excited that you exist in the world. And yeah, I just love you. The end.
And I have loved this conversation. I love the way that you kind of pull threads together. You've given me so much to think about, Gia. Thank you. Really, really have loved this.
See, I told you that was such an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for her just bringing her full badassery, full humanity, and sharing that with us because she is busy. She is booked and busy, and I just love her so much. I hope you, beautiful bold soul that you are, that you show up this week with your full, as always. I appreciate you listening. I appreciate that you're out there living your life and that you actively choose to spend this time listening to this podcast. It means so much to me. And I just deeply appreciate you. So I will see you next week. Bye.